heard from Sir Keir Starmer there in a fairly buoyant mood, and understandably so. Can we go back to January of last year addressing the pandemic crisis?
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we passed the tragic milestone of 100,000 COVID deaths in the United Kingdom. So could he tell us why he thinks that the United Kingdom has ended up with a death toll of 100,000, the highest number in Europe?
He was not alone. Angela Rayner, his deputy, said last May of last year, Boris Johnson was too slow to introduce not one but 3 lockdowns, which left us with one of the worst death tolls in Europe. And now, of course, the facts come out at last from the World Health Organization, so it's not some sort of pressure group. And while I want to preface this, we are talking about deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. And no one gains from this. But I do think the record has to be put straight. That those who are saying Britain had fared, or United Kingdom had fared so badly, it was the worst in the country, Boris Johnson and his team were killing people, allowing people to die. Again, no one emerges well from this. The figures are grim. But the reality has to be seen here, actually, that compared to the rest of Europe and compared to the rest of the world, the United Kingdom did not do so badly. So all those people are saying he's got blood on his hands. Let's briefly take you through the figures, again saying we are talking about the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. So this is the number of excess deaths per 100,000 from 2020 and 2021. The United Kingdom figure stands at 109. The European average was 170 from the World Health Organization's. Countries such as Bulgaria, Poland, Italy, Germany, Spain scoring in excess of, and some of them consider, I won't quote the numbers because we're talking about human lives here, but at least the truth is out now. I'm not saying we did fantastically well. There was much that should have been done better. But to those who say, it is the worst, check the figures. Jamie Jenkins is health commentator and former head of health statistics at the ONS, Office for National Statistics. How important is it to look at these figures to see how the country fared in Europe and indeed the rest of the world in your view? Good morning.
I remember quite early on in the pandemic, actually, Nick, Chris Whitty himself was saying that you kind of need to wait in the fullness of time to look at excess deaths and all-cause mortality. So the figures that have come out, and you're right to say that they're pretty grim figures.
Yes.
No countries really come out really well on this. But what this does, Nick, is when you're looking at COVID deaths and they're recorded differently by different countries, you do get some inconsistency. So you strip all of that out. And what the World Health Organization has done is looked at the total deaths that they've observed over the last 2 years and what you would have expected, say, had there been no pandemic. And it kind of quite clearly shows that the UK hasn't fared as bad as some other comparable countries. And that's not to say the UK is completely off the hook and some mistakes weren't made. But I think there was some premature calling. I think he was just played some clips from Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner there that's saying that the UK has one of the largest death tolls in Europe. Now, that is still the case, but we've got to remember there's some mathematics in this, Nick, in that we're a much bigger country than some nations. So I think for me what striking in some of the figures, Nick, is that in the first year of the pandemic, the likes of Spain, Italy, the UK did do pretty badly. And Germany did pretty well, and everybody was saying, look at the German model. And then the second year of the pandemic, the UK and Italy and Spain fared much, much better than Germany. So that's why you kind of need to wait for that pandemic to go through the population. Look at the figures now. They are pretty grim worldwide as well. But I think in the fullness of time, the UK has not fared as bad as what some people were saying we were a couple of years ago.
You're quoted in copy in one of the newspapers today, the Daily Mail. There was a degree of perhaps attempts to score points politically, Jamie.
No, indeed, and you can see that just by the clips that you've played this morning. And remember now, the health has devolved across the country. And if you compare Wales and England, for example, and look at the death rates, there's very little difference at all between Wales and England, Nick, even though Wales at times have had more significant restrictions than England, and I actually live in Wales. So I think there were people trying to score political points with the data. This is very tragic. You want to try and take the politics out of it all. And I think, in the fullness of time, we're not still out of the woods yet. The good news is for the listeners is that deaths so far this year have been below average. That's in part because of the excesses we've seen over the last few years. And things are starting to get kind of back to normal levels of what you'd expect for the time of year. So, in terms of, there are some green shoots of recovery. We've got to that plan now where we're living with COVID. And the good news is we're not seeing the excess deaths.